In April of 2011, HBO premiered the first episode of Game of Thrones to an audience of just over 2 million. And just 6 years later, the season finale of Season 7 attracted over 10 million viewers. So in 7 years, Game of Thrones has become the most expensive show on air and HBO's biggest and most critically acclaimed production. And because of this immense viewership, it's no surprise that the show has cultivated a thriving fan community. Not only do fans discuss theories online about what will happen in upcoming seasons, but they also create incredible works of art and travel all over the world to show their support. And in 2017, HBO launched the Game of Thrones live concert, which has since toured in 28 countries and filled some of the biggest stadiums around the world. But what's the story actually about? Well, it follows a myriad of characters in the fictional fantasy world of Westeros as they compete for power and struggle to survive. It's also based heavily off of European medieval history, which makes the world feel incredibly grounded and realistic.
And here we have Bronn, son of...
You wouldn't know him.
And these are just a few of the many reasons why the show has become so popular and struck a chord with so many people. But one of the biggest reasons is that the characters are incredibly complex and make choices that aren't clearly right or wrong.
Mercy, sire! I didn't kill anyone! I only watched for the guards!
This one was only the Watcher. Hang him last so he can watch the others die.
And of course, a lot of people watch the show for the epic spectacle, the likes of which have never been seen before on television. And hey, that's as valid a reason as any. And as many fans have since learned, the show is actually based off of the widely successful book series, A Song of Ice and Fire. Written by George R.R. Martin, the first book, A Game of Thrones, was published in 1996, and so far there have been 5 books published, with 2 more on the way. Then as the books became more and more successful, Martin started hearing from studios who were looking to buy the rights to adapt the series.
I started getting interest from Hollywood, from various producers and studios who were initially interested in doing it as a feature film. And I met with some of those people, I had phone conversations with some people. I didn't see how it could be done as a feature film, it was simply too big. But it did get me thinking of how could it possibly be done, and I decided the only way it could be done was with someone like HBO.
Then in 2006, David Benioff and Dan Weiss, both accomplished novelists and screenwriters, became engrossed by the novels and knew that they had to meet with George.
It was a one-shot deal. It was one series of books like this. There would never be another series of books like this. There was one place that we could make it. There's nowhere else in the world besides HBO where you could make a show like this.
But from the very beginning, the show was perfectly cast, bringing characters to life that many fans had been reading about for decades.
Well, my brother has his sword, and I have my mind, and a mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone. That's why I read so much Jon Snow.
The show was also able to explore some areas that are only hinted at in the books. For example, there are subtle clues that suggest a relationship between Sir Loras and Lord Renly. But in the show, since they're not confined by the POV structure of the books, they're able to directly address what's going on. And many of these scenes that further develop the characters in Season 1 were actually a happy accident. In the DVD commentary, Dan and Dave mentioned that when they'd finished writing the first season, several episodes were running a bit short on time. But since they didn't have the budget for extra sets or more actors, they wrote several scenes with just 2 characters talking, and they ended up being some of the most poignant character moments in the whole show.
How long can hate hold a thing together?
Well, 17 years is quite a long time.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
But with seasons 3 and 4, we start to see bigger and bigger deviations. This is partly because of the butterfly effect of small changes in earlier seasons causing larger problems later on.
Jamie. Thank you.
Both seasons 3 and 4 are also an adaptation of A Storm of Swords, the 3rd book in the series, and is nearly 1,000 pages long. This means that many plot lines from the books became either massively reduced or written out entirely. For example, Jojen and Mera Reed are introduced much earlier in the series, so we're able to get to know them before they become incredibly important characters. But it's only in seasons 5 and 6 that much more drastic changes started being made. The characters and events surrounding the Dorne storyline, for example, were much more complex in the books. Doran Martell is revealed to be one of the greatest schemers in Westeros. The Sand Snakes are legitimately intimidating, and Ellaria is fed up with all the violence that's been consuming her loved ones, which is the exact opposite of how she's portrayed in the show.
This Lannister girl skips about the water gardens, eating our food, breathing our air. Let me have her. Let me send her to Cersei. One finger at a time.
Dan and Dave not only had to deal with the size of books 4 and 5, but they also started catching up to what Martin had written. And without the guide of knowing where the story would go several seasons in advance, they had to begin plotting into unknown territory. This could be why season 6 and 7 began to focus more on the spectacle and shocking moments, rather than the subtle nuance of previous seasons.
I fought Joffrey for you. We are kin. Stark and Karstark.
That didn't stop you from betraying me, and it won't save you now.
I don't want it to save me. I want it to haunt you to the end of your days.
But with season 7 only having 7 episodes, the story had to be massively compressed. This means that events that would play out over the course of several episodes in previous seasons now seem to be smashed into just one. This marks a very noticeable and sometimes jarring shift in the way the story develops. Then combined with the increased amount of spectacle, the political intrigue and character development that made the earlier seasons so compelling ended up being lost. This resulted in certain characters acting in ways that don't make logical sense, but is needed to progress the plot.
I didn't betray Robb. I didn't betray our entire family for my beloved Joffrey.
You should be on your knees thanking me. We're standing in Winterfell again because of me.
However, that's not to say that the huge battles and epic moments weren't great. They absolutely were. We finally get to see dragons wreaking havoc on Westerosi troops. Hardhome was beautifully shot and incredibly terrifying, and the Battle of the Bastards was one of the most realistic depictions of medieval warfare that's ever been put to film. However, it's a shame that the character development wasn't given the same care and detail as some of these huge set pieces. But with the yearly production cycle, some things are going to be lost. But unlike Dan and Dave, who have a very tight schedule and a limited budget, George R.R. Martin has no such concerns. And while it's clear that he desperately wants to finish the series and is aware of how rabid his fans are for another book, Martin refuses to compromise the quality of the series.
Where you at with Winds of Winter? How's it coming?
Working on it. Working on it. Believe me, you'll know when it's done. It'll be the shot that is heard round the world.
Martin also has a pretty poor track record when it comes to hitting deadlines. Even though the first 3 books were released within 2 years, the time between publications has since massively increased. After A Storm of Swords was published in 2000, A Feast for Crows took 5 years to complete, and was followed by A Dance with Dragons 6 years later. It's now been over 7 years, with no word yet on when the next one will be finished. What this means is that the HBO show will be giving fans the conclusion to a book series, some of whom have been following since the late 90s. And even though the show has diverged from the books so much, it's likely that the ending will be somewhat similar, at least in the broad strokes. While many fans are excited to see this long-awaited conclusion, HBO has been rapidly trying to find a way to continue that excitement and maintain their rabid fan base. That's why there's currently 5 spin-off shows in development, which will take place in the same world.
One of the shows has a working title, The Long Night, has been greenlit to pilot. I don't know when they'll actually start shooting, but that's going forward. And meanwhile, we have 4 others in various stages of development.
But while the quality of the spin-offs and season finale remains to be seen, HBO have undoubtedly created a global phenomenon. The show has been translated into over 20 languages, and tourists from around the globe have traveled to Northern Ireland, Croatia, Spain, and Iceland just to visit the show's memorable filming locations. And even though the writing and the complexity of the show has been on a steady decline in the past few seasons, it's still incredibly entertaining, and certain events that both the show and the books have been building towards are finally getting paid off. And for all the fans who aren't too happy with the direction the show has taken, there's another world that's filled with complexity and beautiful writing, worthy of picking up the mantle. But we'll save that for another time.
Genuinely sad for us when we kill off characters. We're not doing it. It's not fun, except in the rare occasion, rare occasions, but for the most part, it's actually really depressing.